Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com checks out the major markets. We saw new record highs for the Nasdaq and S&P 500 along with Bitcoin. Ross takes a look at platinum, palladium, gold, uranium, and crude along with the U.S. and Canadian dollars. People's Party of Canada leader Maxime and Stop Bill C-293 committee co-founder Matthew Pauly join us to talk about globalization, Canada's economic future, Alberta separatism, and why a Canadian digital currency would erode your privacy. We take a look at U.S. real estate with Robert Campbell, the publisher of the Campbell Real Estate Timing Letter. He tells us 90% of the U.S. real estate market still has rising prices. He also comments on tariffs and has some health tips for us. We'll talk to Ross Clark right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com, where you'll find insightful market commentary and timely technical analysis. You can find him on X at Charts by Ross. Welcome back to This Week in Money.
Good to be back, Jim.
Well, the Nasdaq and S&P 500, they just keep crashing that glass ceiling.
Yeah, they do. It's FOMO, people have fear of missing out, and so these things just keep going. They pause for short periods of time, and then they run. But overall here, the S&P in the last few weeks actually they had a 60-day run here where they were up. The S&P was up 25%, and when you look back, this is only the ninth time since 1970 that we've had a run of that magnitude in that short a period of time. Every one of those then had a minor pullback, and you get a nice short-term oversold reading in the RSI, the Relative Strength Index, and that becomes an optimum entry for new positions or even leveraged positions within the uptrend, because each one of those after the pullback went back to a new high. Now, overall, we've been looking at the longer term cycles, which depending upon the index, either topped in December or in February, and it was classic for them to have the 15 to 20% decline, and which we did into April, and then rally up to resistance. Now, in some years, in that long-term cycle, you only retrace about a half to two-thirds of the decline. And this is an instance where we've gone, not through that level, but then that became a catalyst to move to new highs, which is what we've seen now. What I want to be watching for is that if we get the pullback and we get the oversold on the RSI for a short-term buy signal, the rally out of that low will really be one to keep an eye on. We'll see if we can put in a divergence in the oscillators like the RSI if once it goes back to new highs. A divergence would be quite negative, and we'll be looking for that. It's probably in late August into September, but we'll let this market develop.
What's going on with gold?
Gold is just taking its time, just sitting here. We had the April high, and we've gone through this consolidation, and it's interesting. It really, considering the action that we've had in the U.S. dollar, with the dollar bottomed out 3 weeks ago, gold had a minor rally from 3150 back up over 3400. But as the dollar has picked up a little bit on the upside now, the dollar's gone from 96.35, where we got our buy signal. It's put on up to about 98.5, and major resistance there at the 20-week moving average is a target for us. That's around par. But the fact is that gold, considering what has been going on in the currency side of things, really hasn't shown too much strength. We're at 33.50 as of this week, just stuck inside a triangle. Ideally, I'd like to see it pull back and test the 20 or 50-week moving averages. Those would be a few $100 below here. But you take a look at hard assets. Silver managed to get up into the high 30s, so that was new highs for the move. Platinum and palladium, which we've liked here for the last month or two, they've just taken off big time, and only in the last day or so are they having a bit of a pause. But those ones have done exceptionally well, and I think that after a bit of a correction, the basis that they're coming out of have got a lot of potential on the upside.
What's going on with crude?
Crude oil stuck in a trading range, as we've been talking for the last couple of weeks. There's really, from my perspective, really nothing that jumps out to say that you want to be on board this thing either way. So it's you sit back, and I'm sure that some of the other analysts out there that are into the fundamental side of the equation might have some major biases towards it, but we've been sitting at 66 plus or minus $1 here, $2 here for the last couple of weeks, and if anything, I would say maybe it could be a downside bias in it, but it's not a natural play. Let's put it that way.
A lot going on the currency front?
It has. The currencies all topped with the bottom in the U.S. dollar a couple of weeks ago. So the pound, the Canadian dollar, the euro, the yen have all come down on the daily charts. And in the last 48 hours, we've got some good oversold readings, the various oscillators that we look at. So I think you got a chance for them to retrace maybe 38 to 50% of the declines that they've had this month, and we'll see how they come to life there. But overall, because my view on the dollar index is that we would go up and test a longer-term moving average for resistance, then I think whatever bounce we see in these other currencies may be short-lived before they come back down and take out the lows we've got right now.
Bitcoin just shining something fierce?
It is. It's up 20% since we got the sequential and springboard buy signals here in June. Gone from 100 up to 118,000, that is. About 4 or 5 days ago, we got some sequential nines, so that's 9 consecutive days where it's closed about 4 days earlier. That's a point at which you would be looking ideally for a pause that could be up to 10 days. And that's what we're doing right now. We're sitting in this 117 to 120,000 range. And I would say that if it holds above 115,000, the next leg to the upside could be setting up here fairly quickly.
Ross, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Pleasure to be with you, Jim.
My guest has been Ross Clark from chartsandmarkets.com. Find him on X at Charts by Ross. Coming up, Maxime Bernier and Matthew Pauly next on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Maxime Bernier and Matthew Pauly. Maxime, as you know, is the leader of the People's Party of Canada, online at peoplespartyofcanada.ca. He's on Twitter, known as X now, at Maxime Bernier. He's speaking to us from Montreal, and also on the line with us, Matthew Pauly, the co-founder and coordinator of the Stop C-293 committee. You can follow him on X at Matthew Pauly 13 and at Stop C-293 committee. He's speaking to us from Toronto. Maxime and Matthew, welcome to This Week in Money.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be with you, Jim.
Max, how's the Alberta by-election going in Battle River Crowfoot?
Yeah, it's a very important by-election, as you know, Jim, because that's a by-election where Pauly, the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada, tries to be elected and being a member of Parliament again. We have a great candidate there, that is doing a good battle. The election date will be August 18, and I will campaign, and I started to campaign the 1st of July with Jonathan. What we are hearing on the ground is people want real changes, and they're mad at Ottawa and the Liberals and also the Conservatives. And what we are telling them is, if you want real changes, vote for the People's Party. Vote for a party that is in line with your ideas. And as you know, in Alberta, they want a smaller government in Ottawa that won't interfere in provincial jurisdictions, that will respect provincial autonomy, that will let, Alberta to develop their own natural resources, that will stop to be part of the Paris Accord, that will withdraw from the Paris Accord, that will also change the equalization formula to be less generous. And actually, we, the People's Party, we want to cut the equalization payments by half. Last year, the federal government gave $26 billion to Eastern Canada. Mostly that money was coming from Western Canada, and that's unfair. We need to cut that by half. We'll save $13 billion. So that's a nice proposal. We are speaking about that, and we are the only party that is speaking about that, and the Conservative won't do anything there. So for us, it's a nice opportunity to be present and to have more support because of our ideas. So I'll be back in August, beginning of August. I will campaign a couple of days with Jonathan, and we'll see what will be the result. But I'm very confident that we can do very good over there because of the issues that we are proposing to Albertans and every Canadian.
For Max and Matthew, we'll go with Matthew first. What is the Monroe Doctrine, and could it protect Canada from globalist and fraudulent elections?
Yes. Well, that's a good question. The Monroe Doctrine was introduced, I guess, in 1823 by President James Monroe in the States, in the State of the Union address. And it's basically a U.S. foreign policy that they wanted to stop European powers against further colonization or intervention in the Americas. So they basically declared the Western Hemisphere off limits to new European colonies, and inserted that any such actions would be viewed as a threat to the U.S. security. And in turn, they pledged not to interfere in European affairs or existing colonies. Now, back in the 1980s, in Central America, that was essentially the Monroe Doctrine that was in place when you started to see, El Salvador and Guatemala going very sort of socialist. So they, it's close to the United States, so they got involved in that, and there was essentially wars going on there. And it's actually sort of also superpowers in general. For example, back in 1989, Mikhail Gorbachev, had an agreement that, if he would allow East and West Germany to, reduce, tear down the wall and unite, that they would NATO wouldn't advance one country further towards Russia, which now they're in the Ukraine on the border, so that didn't work out so well. So how would that relate to Canada? Because, we now have a prime minister who, of course, is siding up to the EU, and is even before he was prime minister, once he won the election on the Liberal Party as a leader, immediately flew to Europe to meet with European leaders to discuss, working together in partnerships, for security and defense. And then once he won the actual prime minister position in the election, he then flew out and actually inked and signed deals with them. And the problem is that makes, and if you look at the behavior towards the Americans, government, it's basically has been antagonistic. For example, just recently, the digital services tax, trying to get that, introduced again, knowing it would be very unwelcome. And of course, the response was almost an apoplectic, very upset response and a threat of a tariff. And now, as you know, we have a 35% tariff. And that's very serious. So, how could it protect Canada? Well, what happens when America exercises this Monroe doctrine is that they basically do color revolutions and that kind of thing to change the administration of the country. So that would, if that actually happened, they're not going to have like a shooting war like they did in Central America, but they'll just do a color revolution, which is arguably already at play. So,
Maxime.
Yes. If I may add on that, Matthew, you're right. If we want to be sure that the globalist, influence and must be stopped here in Canada, we must elect the right people, and we are the only party that is fighting against the UN globalist agenda, and it's important because we want to keep our sovereignty as a nation. And now you have, the UN, the World Economic Forum, the World Health Organization, all these international organizations try to influence our policies here in Canada. And we have politicians who agree with that and implement that in our legislation. So for us, the fight is here in Canada to stop globalism and to vote for a party that will promote our national sovereignty and say no to these international organizations. And that's part of the program of the People's Party since the creation of our party in 2018. The way to protect us against globalism is to, fight for our country and put Canada first and not these international organizations first.
Would it be fair to say that rigged elections have economic consequences, Matthew?
Absolutely. The government formed after the election would have, of course, powers to enact economic, security laws and policies that could dramatically affect the economy and citizens' pocketbooks, our lifestyle, our freedoms, including the right to own property, travel freely, save money to start a business, pay for a child, post-secondary, and retire with grace. So, if the wrong party gets in because of election, interference or actual rigging, then there's a huge consequence to that. And I would have to say that there's been 16,000 complaints to Election Canada, which is 4 times the existing record for any, election in terms of complaints. So at this point, it's a serious concern. And also, Elections Canada admitted that 120,000 mail-in ballots were never counted, which could easily have swung a handful of ridings from the party that won to the party that was second. So that's just one anomaly. There's a real good, I'm glad you brought that up.
And for us, for the People's Party, I believe at the last election and the previous elections, we didn't have, a very good democratic system with our election. Because, you need to have real debates during election time to give the opportunity to Canadians to be able to have different options. And the fact that, they didn't want the leaders debate commissions didn't want and did everything to be sure that the PPC and myself won't participate in national debates. Because of that, we were not able to have the right visibility with Canadians, and a lot of Canadians still don't know that we exist as a national political party. So if you want to have, good elections and good debates, we need to have, smaller political parties to be able to participate in these national debates on TV. That's important in a democracy. So the fact that we were not there and other small political parties were not there, it's not great for Canadians. And, that's very, I hope that at the next election we will be able to participate, but I doubt, because it is not in the interest of the two major political parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives. They don't want any competition. So that's what I want to see next time. If we can participate, that will help our democracy. That will change our democracy, because we'll have other options that will be on the table, and Canadians will know that they exist.
I just like to chime in that I completely concur with that, and it's very disturbing when we see a political party that's actually qualified to, last time they didn't, the People's Party of Canada wasn't allowed to debate in the previous election, and then they met all the criteria, and then just before this election they changed the criteria, and it only affected Maxime Bernier and the PPC from participating. And when you're blocking out a populist party like that, that's not democracy. So that's a real problem.
President Trump is going to tariff Canada 35% on August 1st due to the continuing flow of fentanyl from Canada into the U.S. Politicians across the country seem to be siding with the fentanyl cartels instead of the Canadian people. Economically, what could this do to Canada, Max?
Yeah, our politicians, the Conservatives and the Liberals, are sitting with this cartel, but also they're sitting and they're promoting and defending the other cartel, that is the supply management cartel, the legal cartel that we have here in Canada in eggs, dairy, and poultry. So we need to abolish that. We need to be sure to have a real free market and not a communist cartel in supply management in dairy, poultry, and eggs. But the Conservative and the Liberals, they're not ready to abolish that. And for President Trump, he tweeted a couple of times about that and saying that if we want to have a new deal, we need to abolish that cartel. And, I agree with that. That would be good for Canadian consumers. And if we don't do that, we won't be able to have a free trade deal with President Trump and the U.S. And that will be detrimental to our economy. We are protecting a cartel, but who's paying for that? Every Canadian and other industries in Canada, because they want to have free access to the U.S. market. So that's why, I said that in 2018 when President Trump was elected at the first time, and we had a renegotiation of our free trade agreement with U.S. and Mexico. And I said, if we want to have a good deal, we need to put that on the table. But now in Ottawa, they passed a legislation a couple of weeks ago and saying, that legislation is about to protect the cartel, and they don't want to put that on the table. And it's too bad, because I really think that we won't have a deal. And that's not working for Canadians when you do that. That's working for that cartel. So that's why, I'm pretty pessimistic about the future of a good deal with the U.S. if we don't do the right thing and put it on the table.
Matthew?
Yeah. Yes. I'd just like to make a note that the economic impact is very significant. Already, we've seen the Canadian steel and aluminum companies have reduced production by 30% since the beginning of the year and laid off thousands of workers in Ontario and Quebec alone, and it's projected to go much higher unemployment. And the manufacturing sector, particularly in Ontario and car building, it's just the economic impact of having these tariffs. Essentially, I mean, if the goal is to cause economic catastrophe to Canadians so that they can roll out their planned CBDC, and people will be desperate to get it, and the universal basic income that's coming with Bill S-206, then they're actually achieving that by antagonizing the Americans and getting these tariffs. And just in the last week, Carney said in English that the tariffs would be negotiated away, this 30% tariff. But in French, he admitted that they would always be tariffs. So I think it's essentially achieving the objectives of what their, the greatest sort of UN agenda is, to roll out, and WEF agendas to roll out these CBDCs by antagonizing the Americans, getting them to cause the tariffs, retaliate with tariffs, which then, craters the middle class here in Canada. That's my sort of more skeptical perspective on that.
We keep hearing Canada is going to get a central bank digital currency, a CBDC. Is that likely to happen? And how would it affect Canadians? Maxime.
Yes, I think it will happen. I don't know when. Actually, a couple of years ago, the federal government gave to the Department of Finance in Canada and the Bank of Canada, I think it was $20 million to look and prepare legislations on a CBDC. And so they did that. And actually, the Bank of Canada came back a couple of months ago, and they said that they won't go ahead with that for now because they didn't have the support of the public. So we were able to win a battle, but only a battle. We didn't win the war. And I believe, I understand the deep state, and they will come back with that project. Actually, if other countries are going into that direction, Canada will follow, and they will come back for that. But, we are against that because it's against the sovereignty of Canadians and the individual sovereignty. If you have that, the Bank of Canada and the government of Canada will know everything about you. Actually, a CBDC, if I can explain that to your listener, it's, when you have a transaction with your bank, and you spend for a dinner yesterday night, you are able to go on your bank account and look at all the spending, and you can see everything that you did with your credit card or with your debit card. That information, these data, are private between you and your banker. I know that. I was a banker before being in politics, and so the bank cannot use that information. It's private information. But if you have a CBDC, the federal government will ask you to open an account at the Bank of Canada. The way that they will do that, they will tell you, if you want to have your pension this month, it will be easier and more efficient if you open an account at the Bank of Canada, and you'll have your pension deposit directly into your account. So that account at the Bank of Canada, now the information, it will be between you and the Bank of Canada, and they will be able to give that information to the federal government. And if you're spending maybe too much money on gas in a month, they can be sure that you won't be able to have access to your account for spending money on gas, for example. So that data will be in the hands of your politicians and the civil servant in Ottawa. So I'm against, and that's why a lot of people are against a CBDC. It's for more control and less privacy. So for now, it's not. It won't happen tomorrow, but I'm pretty sure that the Bank of Canada will come back with a project a couple of years later, and in between, they will try to convince Canadians that is the best thing for them. But we have a very efficient and good system to pay. You can pay with your debit card, with your credit card, with cash. That's very efficient, and we don't need a CBDC to be more efficient, because that's the only argument that they're using to sell that to Canadians, and they will come back with that. So that's why I'm saying we need to stay vigilant, because it may happen in the near future.
Matthew, on digital currency.
Well, I think it's absolutely going to happen. And my perspective is basically looking at this happening earlier, specifically with the EU announced that they're rolling out the CBDC by October 1. So that's all of Europe. So it's been in test in the U.S. for like 3 years, in Canada at least 2+ years. And in total, like there's over 100 countries that have been experimenting with it. It's part of the entire agenda for, the World Economic Forum and the UN, basically, to get people onto that kind of situation where every transaction is being tracked. You have the digital ID, which is the yoke of the control. And if we see where this is in place already, it's not fully in place in China in terms of CBDC, but they do have this app that allows them to, purchase everything on their phone. But there are turnstiles to going to travel stations, like, regional train stations and, to fly and, a lot of places. And you have to show your digital ID or you don't get through. And if you don't, if they decide you've done something wrong, your social credit score is not adequate, then you don't go through. So that's the kind of control that they want, right? The globalist folks that are pushing this whole thing. And the concern I have is that this is going to happen sooner because of the liquidity crisis that's been brewing in the banks, since essentially 2007, 2008, when, the financial, the crisis happened, and they had to run near 0% interest rates, the Fed and also other Western, including Canada, near zero. So that caused asset bubbles in real estate and in the stock market, huge asset bubbles. And now they've done such profligate, like extra spending the governments have, that the debts are so large, and therefore there's so much interest to pay on these bonds, these government bonds, that they can't raise interest, rates above 4 or 5% because they wouldn't be able to pay the interest. So it's coming to a situation now where, even today, there was a story on this, that the banks, Wells Fargo, it was announced that in the first quarter, they borrowed $200 billion to increase their liquidity. And there's a change happening with what's called the supplement leverage ratio between, the Fed and the other organizations that manage that. And now they're going to be carrying, instead of 30-year, term bonds, they're going to be looking at, they were 10-year, and now they're going to move to 1-year Treasury bill. The problem is that's a pattern that happened just before the 2008 crisis, when the banks got really short on liquidity. And why is this relevant to the CBDC thing? Because if you want to roll out the CBDC, you don't want people to get into it for a couple of weeks and go, I don't like this anymore. I'm not going to do this. I'm just going to use cash. And you have to kind of destroy the old system, because the significance of what this is for humanity, this switchover, is so dramatic that once people get a feel for it, they're going to want to reject it. So there's an incentive to take advantage of a crisis. And this liquidity crisis would be a perfect time to do a bail-in. And when the bail-in happens, people are going to be losing their deposits, and even GICs, and potentially even more than that. So I'm worried that this could happen much sooner.
With digital currency, does that would it leave Canada vulnerable to hackers, other foreign players who could get into your money? And also with a digital currency, could the government's goal be to tax every transaction?
Yes, actually, that would be a big risk. The fact that the government can implement such a process and a new currency like that, digital currency, I'm very concerned, about our privacy, and I'm very concerned when the federal government will have more information on us. They can use that, but also it can be very dangerous because other people can have access to that information, politicians, and so that's another argument to be against a central bank digital currency, and we will fight to be sure that it won't happen. But we are the only political body that is fighting against that.
Another thing, if we all have to use a digital currency, and I'm thinking, Matthew, you'd probably know more about this. After the Truckers' Freedom Convoy to Ottawa, they seized and froze a number of bank accounts from people barely associated with the protest. Would this give the government power over everybody? They can just freeze your money instantly.
Absolutely. In fact, that's part of the design of this. When you have everything controlled centrally, literally, you don't have your bank account with a retail bank anymore. Your bank account's directly with the Bank of Canada. They've got an AI server there, which is implementing their policies, which is looking at your social credit score when you try to do a transaction. and it makes a decision based on their rules they've set. If you're trying to do something that's against a policy that the government wants you to do, then you're against that policy somehow. Like maybe you have eaten too much red meat that month, or maybe you posted something online that was critical of the government. They can just literally deny your transaction, including trying to buy a ticket to get to go somewhere. So yeah, that level of control is just gives them total ability to basically nudge and coerce behavior, which is the whole role. I mean, that's what's called the control grid. That's what this technology allows.
Isn't that what's happening in China right now with facial recognition? If you don't have enough social points or whatever, they can remove your right to take holidays or travel around? That's it. That's absolutely true. In fact, the facial recognition is so good that a month or so ago, when I landed in an airport there, I walked up to my wife and I walked up to the luggage turnstile, and it was nobody standing around, and I didn't see the bags coming down. And all of a sudden, within like literally 1 to 1.5 minutes, a nice person walks up, a man, and he's pushing our luggage on a little luggage carrier. And he knew exactly who we were and just passed us our luggage without us showing anything, because they had figured it out as we got off the plane, facial recognition and going through customs and stuff. And then the cameras watched us, and they knew that they had the bags pulled out and delivered right to us for the cart in a matter of like a minute or two from the time we walked into where the turnstile was for the luggage. So yeah, it's very, very effective technology at tracking people. And it's all over. And this is why they're building that infrastructure out here. They're putting more and more cameras up, because that way you can track people as they're walking through the city, as they're driving. There's all sorts of handshakes from the technology in your car to the light poles. Wow. So yeah, it's ultimate track and trace and nudge and control, or coerce. Could Prime Minister Carney have been selected to be an economic hitman, Maxime?
I think so. If you look at Carney, what he did before being in politics, he was the special envoy for the UN on climate change. He is part of the elite for sure. He was, the governor of the Bank of Canada, the governor of the Bank in England, working in these big international organizations also. So, he wrote a book also on climate change. He believes that the climate is very dangerous and we must have strong policies against climate change. So I don't know who will be Carney, the prime minister. I know that, he did pass a bill C-5 that is in favor of pipelines. We don't know what he will do, but I'm very concerned about Carney. I don't like what he did in the past. He is part of the elites. He was in Davos a couple of times with the World Economic Forum. So all these globalist policies, that's part of what he believes. So, and I strongly think that he will try to implement these globalist policies here in Canada. And that's not good for the future of the country. That's not good for individual freedom. That's not good for the autonomy of provincial governments. So we'll see what he will do. But only after a couple of months in office, I think that we cannot trust him.
I totally concur with that. And I would say that if you look at the background of what he did when he was the governor, both in Canada and the governor of the Bank of England. So in Canada, one of the things he did, of course, was he started selling off the gold reserves of the country. And by the time he left, 40% had disappeared, like been sold off. And there's speculation yet to be confirmed that much of that went to the Bank of England. And then the remaining 60% was gone shortly after that, which now means that we don't have anything backing our dollar other than the U.S. dollar, which is also sort of by design being engineered to go lower and lower. It's down 10 points. The Dixie is down 10% this year so far. So that attaches our currency like by a tether to that currency, and that's because we don't have any gold. So then, of course, when he was in the Bank of England, he expanded the money supply by 42%, which created, of course, inflation. And the people who have fixed income, they can't afford that because obviously your interest rates have to go up. They went up to 10% inflation just as he was leaving in the next year, because it takes a while for the money, like the money supply, to go up, spread out through the economy. It takes like a year or so, even 2 years for some things. So just as he's leaving, inflation starts to go up, and then within that year it went up to 10%. So they increased interest rates, and then that means seniors, a lot of them lost their homes. So that take away wealth from the middle class, and of course, actually, holding companies, including Brookfield, went in and picked up those properties pretty cheap. So if you look at, that's an economic hitman kind of action. And don't forget that if you since he's the UN Special Envoy for climate action and finance, that's essentially his job, is to cause the implementation of the UN 2030 and SDG agenda, which means that you need to, and also for that matter, the WEF, a Great Reset, because he's on the board or something really up high in that organization as well, and that's their goal, is to extract the wealth from the middle class and put everybody on this control grid. So yeah, I would say absolutely. In fact, Tom Longo, who's a person I often quote, who was on Twitter at TFL1728, he's a chemist and a physicist, very successful in both of those fields, and he's basically an economic or money analyst of following the flows of money and central banking and everything. And he stated in an interview that I was really pleased to be a part of, that he coined the term, Mark Carney is the high priest of globalist finance, and that he represents the EU continentalist bankers, and the EU desperately needs to extract wealth from somewhere. And the U.S. has blocked some of their other targets to do that. Now, Canada, as a hugely resource-rich Commonwealth country, is a good target. So I think that he's essentially strip mining the wealth out of Canada to benefit the EU. Thus, for example, the $220 billion committed to the EU to rearm Europe. Our own military is, scavenging for kit and weapons because they've donated so much to the Ukraine. Oh, and yeah, he donated another, $4.3 billion in arms and cash last week or so, which brings it to about $23.5 billion since the war started. So the amount of economic damage when you have a country that's already got they doubled the debt in the last 10 years, the Trudeau government, and he's deficit spending at more than double the rate of Trudeau, we're just going to be in for a mass amount of inflation of the money supply to monetize that debt, and it's going to mean super high prices, which is going to cause everyone to struggle because your income doesn't go up, the salaries and such at that pace that the inflation is happening. So that's going to push people onto the UBI, which is the whole goal, which is the universal basic income, right, which requires the digital ID and also CBDC. So anyway, yeah, I'd say that's the definition of an economic hitman, to extract resources from the people in the country and put them elsewhere.
How is Canada's new Prime Minister doing so far, Max?
Like I just said before, if I want to be honest, we really don't know because it's about a couple of months. But what we know is what he believes in, and now it's only talk. He said, for example, to Danielle Smith in Alberta, she has 9 conditions that are very important for her, for a better Alberta and, more freedom over there. She wants to be sure that Albertans will be able to develop their own natural resources, and they will be able to build pipelines. And so she has a couple of conditions. And Carney a day said, yes, I agree with that. And the other day he's saying another things. So we need to still wait a little bit. But I don't believe that, the most important issues that we are having as a country is all these deficits and our big, huge debt. So Carney will spend money that we don't have on almost everything, like Trudeau. He's not speaking about balancing the budget, and we can do that. We can balance the budget in 1 year by cutting about $45 billion if you have the courage to do that and if you want to work for Canadians. but Carney won't do that. Polyev is not speaking about that. And so we'll have huge debt. And like, we just said before, this will be inflation for the future. And it's the way to pay for these deficit. Our standard of living, will go down. Our purchasing power is going down. It will hurt every Canadian. And that being said, after that, the other huge problem that we have is mass immigration. And Carney won't do anything about that. That's having a huge impact on housing prices, on health care services. All these people must have a roof. They must be able to go in the hospital if they need it. We don't have real good services for what we are paying for health care, and add all these people. They have an impact on the infrastructures, on school. So, when you have mass immigration like that, it is having an impact, and we are paying for that. But Polyev and Carney don't want to fix that. So I don't think that, the next couple of months will be better economically and socially. It would be about the same. So Carney is not the solution for the country. And Polyev also, he doesn't have the courage to speak about the real issues with the real solutions. So that's why we exist, the People's Party. And we'll see what will happen. But Carney is not our savior. On the contrary, he will worsen the economy and everything that is happening in our country.
Matthew?
Wow, I totally agree with that. My sort of thoughts are that, if you measure by his mission, which is basically to destroy our long-term, great relationship with our biggest trading partner, the U.S., and our security arrangements with them, and instead cozy up to the EU, which right now has essentially Soviet-style governance with a Central European Commission unelected that has the ultimate power. So that is a really bad direction. So he's getting an A+ for meeting his mission. But in terms of enhancing the finances and security of Canadians, I'd say he's getting a D- to an F. He's, like I said before, he's accumulating more deficit and debt, double the rate over double the rate of Trudeau's record. $92 billion this year, and the C.D. Howe Institute, I think it was $72 billion per year over the next 3 years, amounting to, over $300 billion of increased debt, increased deficits, and the monetization of approximately half of that is going to, significantly increase debt. And also, he's enacting legislation that takes away from our privacy and overrides charter rights like we've never seen. I've never seen this in my life. For example, Bill C-5 and such. So, no, I'd say that he's doing very poor, and his record in terms of managing the U.S. relationship is just dismal.
For Matthew, Catherine Austin Fitts connected the dots between the economics of Social Security and COVID. Can you tell us about that, and is it being mirrored in Canada?
Sure. So this basically comes back. This Catherine Austin Fitts, by the way, for people who don't know, she was a very senior investment banker, and then she was actually the assistant secretary for housing and urban development under the Bush government. She was like inside of investment banking and inside the U.S. government at a very high level, and she broke off and decided to get out. And she has her own thing called Solari, and she does these analysis and reports, and she's crossed over, to the other side, so to speak. And she said the history is this. In 1997, they realized basically the U.S. government and the bankers behind financing the U.S. government, they realized the Ponzi scheme on the Roth IRAs was going to break by about now. So that was basically, it started in 1982, I believe it was, these Roth IRAs, which have never been, it's a way for Americans to pay into an IRA that's supervised by the Treasury and the Fed. And so the thing is, it's never been audited. And therefore, whether it's there or not is a really good question. But they realized that by 2025, around now, baby boomers, retiring is coming to the near the peak because they were born before 1964. So what we're seeing is that in 1997 they realized that they weren't going to have enough money to pay the social services entitlement. So in 1998 they passed a law that the U.S. government doesn't have to audit their books anymore. 1999, the first 1.5 trillion went missing. And I remember this, the day before 9/11, it was announced another trillion was missing. And with a total, according to Captain Austin Fitz, approximately 20 trillion has been missing. Why? Because they have to avoid baby boomers openly rebelling when they discover both the Roth IRAs are not there. And you can't, the Bernie Madoff thing was a good example, right? When he got investments from the guy who owned the New York Mets, and then this guy got into financial trouble and tried to get his money out. That he didn't have it, and that he's in jail forever. And so you can't taper a Ponzi scheme. Except the U.S. government figured out a way. If you, for example, created a gain-of-function virus and released it, and then gave a whole bunch of fear propaganda to make people think that it was deadly like Ebola when it wasn't. And then they took an experimental gene therapy, and it started to take out people, particularly people. It's 1,000 times more deadly to people in elderly years than it is to children, for example. That tapers the Ponzi scheme, so you're not having to pay those people out their benefits. So that's what's the connection between Social Security and COVID. And at the same time, they're in a situation of having to manage the destruction of the 200-year fiat USD, which was pulled off the gold standard about 50 years ago. And on average, a fiat currency lasts only 35 years once it's brought off the gold standard. Why? Because they just print too much of it, and they don't have anything to back it, and the confidence, and you have a currency crisis because the debt gets too big and you can't pay the interest on the bonds. So that's where the digital tokens, with the digital ID, the digital tokens being a CBDC, that controls over every individual and it gives the ability to nudge and coerce their behavior is the new, thing. And that's part of the whole Social Security and COVID conversation.
Max?
And also, if I may add, she argues also that lockdowns were a pretext for a digital ID system. So I think she was right about that. They were not able to implement that fully at that time during 2019, 2020, 2021. But like we said before, that may come later. So digital ID and all that control system, that's something that our governments and other governments will want to do to try to control people. So we must be vigilant about everything that is happening, and that's why I said, our government is not our friend. The problem that we have in society right now, it's because of a big fat government that is trying to control everything and taxing everything.
I totally agree with Maxime, with your comments there, and just like to add that we need to really underscore here that it's this government was infiltrated by when we say globalists, for example, we're talking, for example, World Economic Forum, young global leaders, right? And Klaus Schwab, bragged. Remember, everyone's seen the video about we have penetrated over half of the cabinet. They're supporting us, right? So when you've got over half the cabinet, and it's the same people, basically 80% the same people that are in the new cabinet, they're basically rooting for public-private partnerships government, which, let's just define what that is. When you have public-private partnerships as the government, that's what Mussolini was developing in Italy, which he called corporatism, and the rest of us called it fascism. So that's really, really bad news. And anyway, I just want to add that. Thanks.
Is the ongoing push for gun confiscation likely to cause investments into Canada to stop and wealth to leave Canada?
I think yes. Actually, you have more and more legislation to control people who own guns, and we are fighting against that. People can go on our website and read our gun policy, peoplespartyofcanada.ca. And we think that, if you own a gun, you're not a criminal. You must have the right to use it. And that's why also at the same time, we believe in the Castell doctrine. So that means that you can use your gun to defend yourself and your property. But for the conservative and the liberals, that's the opposite. They want people to not own any guns, and they try to confiscate the guns. I believe that that's their plan, and that's why, we are against that. But if that happened, yes, people can leave the country with their property, with their money, with their wealth, and that can have an economic impact. So it's again, the government is trying to please people living in big cities like Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver, when you have a lot of leftists over there, and they're manipulated by the leftist media, and they think that owning guns, it's very dangerous. But gun crimes are happening, with guns that are not registered, and guns that are coming from the black market. So the only way to fight crimes is to be tough on crimes and not to try to confiscate guns from ordinary Canadians.
I was just going to say that, the investments were already leaving Canada since, February of 2022. Recall that, when they seized those bank accounts, a whole bunch, like billions of dollars left Canada. And it hasn't really come back. And when you break that contract with the commercial sector and with the consumers of, that we have bank accounts and you just can't go in and take them because you don't like us, disagreeing with you, and peacefully, gathering and for that breaks their contract. And it says you're basically a socialist or a totalitarian government. So, the gun confiscation, if they, proceed with that will definitely cause more, strife between Western Canada and Eastern Canada. Strife is not the right word. Separation, I'd be closer to it.
In 2009, then Prime Minister Stephen Harper, the one who signed Canada onto Agenda 2030, had as Finance Minister Jim Flaherty make bank bail-ins legal in Canada. It's now 2025. Should we be concerned that consumers, not the banks, will be responsible for their debts?
Yes, you're right about that. I was part of that government in that time, and actually, yes, Jim Flaherty did in the budget pass change the legislations to allow the bail-ins. What is bail-in? So instead of, if there's a financial crisis, instead of the federal government, bailing out the banks with taxpayers' money and giving them, the money that they need, it will be depositors who will have to pay for it. So that means if you have money in the bank, maybe a day the bank will tell you you don't have access to your money anymore, and what we will give you shares and participation in the ownership of a bank, and but that ownership, the value of that will be almost zero, because they will do that because the bank will be in financial crisis. So they will give you share of a bank where the value of that bank will be almost nothing, and they call that a bail-in. Bail by the depositor, the people who have deposit at the bank. That is in the legislation in Canada. That is in the legislation in the U.S. That is in the legislations of almost Western countries after the great financial crisis in 2008, 2009. That was coming from the globalists. They wanted every country to have that in their legislation. And so that's part of our legislation. Your question is, should we be concerned? Yes, we should be concerned about that. And we should be concerned that also, with these huge deficit coming from the huge deficit from, almost every Western countries, the only way to pay that, it will be with inflation and creation money out of thin air, so that consumers will have to pay for that. And that's happening right now. That monetary reset is happening right now, and that's why gold is going up, And, we cannot trust these governments with this huge deficit. They won't have the courage to tax people to pay for this deficit because they know that people don't like taxes, but they will use the hidden tax, the inflation tax, by creating money. And like that, that will be a way to pay for these huge deficits with a monetary reset. So put all that together, the bail-in, the deficit, the inflation that is coming, it will be, if we're not prepared, and Canada is not prepared, the Bank of Canada doesn't have any gold reserve anymore, so it will hurt everybody. And that's why we must be concerned.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I'm more on I would say, alarmed. I think if the average public knew what is actually the situation with the U.S. banks, particularly, their liquidity, they're definitely in a crisis with liquidity, and it's going to spread. We're all connected, interconnected, and so it's going to affect our banks as well. And with this inevitable situation where liquidity is shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, and they're having to borrow huge amounts of money to try and continue to operate. And like I said, they've shifted from 30-year to 10-year and now 1-year treasuries as they're sort of backing up of their cash deposits and such. It's absolutely it's destined to, just as in 2007 or 2008 rather, it's destined to cause a massive drop of the markets and the bank bail-in, and that we should be really, really concerned about that.
How long do you think it will take for most Canadians to wake up to realize there's a choice, the globalist uniparty or the People's Party? Maxime?
I hope it will be, tomorrow, but I doubt. I hope it will be before the next election. Actually, Matthew and I just said that, the next couple of months or couple of years will be economically very difficult for Canadians. And we will be in a stagflation, inflation and stagnation, and in a recession. So when you are in a situation like that, people will be ready to look at another alternative, and the People's Party is there for that. We are offering to Canadians another alternative, and a real one. So a non-globalist alternative, an alternative that is putting Canadian first and our country first. So I believe that because the next couple of months will be economically very difficult for Canadians, they may try to look at us, the PPC, for another alternative. But also all that depends on the visibility of the People's Party. That's why the mainstream media and our opponents, they don't want to give us any visibility. They are canceling us because I believe, the more people will be able to understand and read our platform, the more support we will have. And that's why, I'm with you today, Jim, and that's why we are very active on social media. So answering your question, I think that I hope that it will be tomorrow, but I doubt, but it will come. Our time will come, and when that will happen, we will be ready as a party.
To the bills from hell. First bill, C-293. What is it and why is it concerning, Matthew?
Right. So that's the Pandemic Preparedness and Prevention Act, and it was sponsored by Daniel Erskine Smith. He's a former Liberal sitting with the Liberals, and so the media didn't cover it as it was going through the House because it was an independent bill, which they typically don't cover, but, that was just a ploy. And the problem with this bill is it looks like it was written by the WHO. It has 4 clauses in it that severely regulate food animal agriculture, including, banning live animal markets, this is how, beef farmers are, buy their cow. They have to, bring in new genetic stock. So they have to have these live animal markets where they parade, the cow through and in front of the farmers, and they look at it and such, and then they start an auction. You can't do that anymore. And all the excessive regulations on animal agriculture, while there's a clause in the bill as well about introducing alternative proteins, which means synthetic meat and insects. In fact, the government put a couple billion with it, or no, I think it was 400 million, into that cricket factory near London, Ontario. So that they believe in this. And also it creates something called pandemic preparedness and prevention, or actually they reverse the word, so pandemic prevention and preparedness coordinator. And this is a person that has like a czar, and it involves a change to the Health Act, an amendment to the Health Act, so that the health minister can give whatever powers, duties, and functions to that person as they deem appropriate. Well, when you're talking about pandemic management and giving all this power to someone who's supposed to be from the Public Health Agency of Canada, PHAC, which is where Theresa Tam was, and we know that they are listed in the on the website for the WHO Satellite Office for Canada in Washington, D.C. The PHAC and Health Canada are listed in the portfolio of the WHO Satellite Office in Washington. So they're basically, fully endorsing and part of the WHO in terms of their ideology. They're following it completely. So to give that kind of a person that kind of powers is very disturbing. So that's what actually led to all my activism in getting involved in the C-293 thing. So it's very serious, and it's gone through, the House, and then it went through to second reading, and then it stopped because I had to, in the parliamentary session. However, given that it's like the closing pinch on like a corral, and it's the last rail on the corral to close, that's really bad, and he's for sure, Carney's going to introduce that as what. First of all, I think the online, the old Online Harms Act 63, that's going to be reintroduced. He's already messaged that just recently. He's going to do that. So that's going to shut everybody up because people who are posting anything online, that's going to offend even the government. It could be you go get a $70,000 fine, or jail. So. Then the next thing would be the C-293, which would be coming as a different number, and let's just hope that doesn't happen, which it's going to. I mean, unless something calamitous happens, that's going to happen. And I should just mention that the pandemic prevention, the WHO pandemic agreement and the IHR amendments, the deadline for opting out of that is in 2 days, on the 19th. And he's on vacation, and no way he's going to pull us out of that. And that's going to have effects on us. For example, the failure, it compels a traveler to undergo vaccination or other prophylaxis and additional established health measures to prevent the control or spread of a disease, including isolation, quarantine, or placing the traveler under public health observation. That's unacceptable. That's only one of the top 10 problems with the international health regulations, which hook into essentially the pandemic agreement. So, yeah. There's definitely real problems with this 293 and the related bills.
Maxime?
Yes?
What's your feeling on Bill C-293?
I agree with what Matthew said. He's an expert on that bill, and we need to do the fight, and we are doing that fight. So it's very concerning for Canadians, privacy, and also the fact that it can also implement all these crazy ideas coming from the World Economic Forum. We don't need that bill, and I will do the fight with all our candidates across the country, and I'm very pleased that Matthew is a real person, and that is starting that fight all across the country on social media and everywhere. And so you're right, Matthew. We need to get rid of that as soon as possible.
Yeah, I thank you very much for that, Maxime. I appreciate that. I just want to mention one more thing about it, that it's important to understand there's a principle here. So in 293 section 3(2)(n), it calls for set out cooperative measures or agreements on disease outbreak prevention and preparedness between the Government of Canada, other foreign governments, and key international organizations, including the World Health Organization. and the United Nations Environment Program, the World Organization for Animal Health, and the Agricultural Organization of the United Nations. Why is this really significant? Because they're talking about cooperative measures on and agreements on disease outbreak prevention and preparedness. Well, so essentially, the WHO pandemic agreement, if it got watered down too badly or whatever, didn't get passed in Canada by the Prime Minister, this bill would have pulled it in. And this bill can still pull it in more when they add make more binding clauses into it. So this just demonstrates the multi-layers and redundant layers of attack here. So that if this one bill fails, well, it's going to come through another mechanism. So we have a lot of bills that we have to really be following closely. And Canadians need to get off of watching mainstream television. And the reason why that I meant bringing that up is April 2025 to April 2021, $880 million were distributed by the government to the mainstream media. And that's why another reason we didn't have a free and fair election, in my opinion, was that they were all supporting and the bias towards, to the Liberals. And so people aren't going to get the information about these bills, these critical bills. And we're just touching on one here, 293. There's a lot more. And so in order to know what's going on, you have to get onto other sources of information, other alternative things. And even on X, for example, on Twitter, there's really good information because all the mainstream media even is on X as well. In fact, they pull stories off of X because that's really the clearinghouse for information. So if you want to know what's going on, I recommend getting on, following, credible voices on X.
Matthew, next is Bill C-5. What is it and why is it concerning?
Right. That's a nasty one as well. And what's really disturbing about it is that it passed. In fact, it was rammed through in 1 week in the House of Commons and in 4 days in the Senate. In fact, they actually, in the second reading, or even before it went into first reading, they had to agree that in the second reading, there was a motion, you see, when it was introduced, and Chrystia Freeland was there, and the head of the Privy Council was there, and they told the senators they have to adopt this motion, and it said that once they started going into the second reading, they couldn't adjourn the part like the Senate. They couldn't, adjourning means okay, we're going home for the night. No, they couldn't leave until they passed it. That was actually a motion that they adopted prior to going into second reading. So that's how desperate the government was ramming this through. And the sort of propaganda about it is it's to help the government push out projects in the national interest. They just cut through all the normal regulatory red tape. But it's actually disturbing, really disturbing, the powers in there. It allows the government to essentially override all acts of Parliament, which goes back to King George time, except for 17 acts they put as excluded. But those 17 acts, how many different acts there are in Parliament? I mean, Maxime would know more than me, but I'm thinking hundreds, if not thousands. And they've only exempted 17 they're not going to overrule. The other thing is that they can, even when they're not in session, this is maybe one of the reasons they wanted to force it through so quickly, because they wanted to get it so the summer break now, going into September, right? They can actually, it's right in the bill, they can change and add national projects and change and add laws that they're overriding without going back in Parliament. So it's really granting extraordinary powers to the government. And I'm afraid that because the Privacy Act is not one of those 17 that they're saying they're not going to overwrite, that's the only act I can think of that you could use to try and resist the CBDC, because the digital ID is involved. And you could maybe try and, go to court on the digital ID being a privacy problem. But that's not an exclusion list, so therefore it can be overruled. So that might actually help with the rollout of digital IDs in CBDC. It gives massive amounts of power to basically, ignore all jurisdictional and environment regulations and financial accountability, and from the government's, spending billions on these new projects. And what about conflicts of interest too? I mean, there's a lot we've learned about Carney's conflicts of interest that is going to be a real issue. That this bill could actually help with him. Anyway, So everything to, from telecoms to green energy to foreign-owned infrastructure, it all gets exempted from legal scrutiny with this bill.
And Jim, I agree with Matthew on that also. What I didn't like is members of parliament did not do their job. Their job is to look at the bill and having debates about it and questioning and coming with amendments and modifications. And actually, when Poilievre and the Conservative voted for that bill, they had a lot of amendments. But Poilievre said, if you agree or not with our amendments and modification, it's okay if you don't agree. We will vote for the bill, and that will be it. So Poilievre was so happy with the clauses in the bill that is speaking about maybe having pipelines and big projects that he wanted that bill to pass, and that's what he did. Poilievre did not do his role as the opposition. He voted for that. He had some amendments, but he said to Carney, it's okay if you don't take it. And what happened? Carney didn't take any of his amendments. So we had a parliament that didn't do their job, during that time. And that's very concerning.
I totally agree with that. In fact, this is the only legislation I've seen that has this level of power granting to the government to override all other, legislation and all other regulations except for 17. I mean, that's just a humongous grant of power. Now, if I was a leader of opposition or just, someone else, and I'm a citizen, I expect them to immediately be asking questions, immediately start to resist this, because this is a massive taking away and breaking down of all the securities and regulations that were to protect us for going on for many decades, and freedoms as well. And they're just overriding it all, taking it all away. Why did he agree? Why did the CPC agree? I don't understand why they wouldn't make this the biggest news event, And similarly, by the way, the C-293, when it was in first and second reading in the House, they didn't show up. The CPC, the Security Party, they didn't even show up to the actual reading. They had two backbenchers. And that's the bill, like I said, that essentially could make it so that this pandemic czar that's from the PHAC, the Public Health Agency of Canada, like Theresa Tam, could essentially order people to be put into quarantine because they've been exposed to a virus, like somebody, their phone indicated with some intersection, suddenly or some day someone got a PCR test and, you've been exposed, you have to go into quarantine, and maybe even in quarantine, as it is now in Western Australia and also in New Zealand, they can forcibly inject you with an experimental medicine, i.e., an mRNA gene therapy that's experimental. So this kind of not standing up as the opposition, but going along with this, it reminds me very much that it is like a uniparty. They both support this globalist UN Agenda 2030 and its SDGs and all these pandemic agreements that's going to, put us under more lockdowns and stuff as they, develop more gain-of-function viruses and they leak out of labs. And the idea that the opposition party didn't even go after C2 or C5 is just shocking. And 293.
The next one is Bill C2. What is it and why is it concerning, Matthew?
Right. This is an act that's got to do with, measures related to the security of the border, the Canada-U.S. border. Oh, yeah. And the three highlights for me on that are basically that the CSIS can open your mail now and collect data with no warrant needed. So all my life, not since maybe the FLQ crisis when I was just a kid in 1970 or 71 or something, they can't just open your mail. They have to have a warrant. Well, now they can just go and open your mail. And that bill is frightening. And it lets put the 10K limit on cash transactions. It allows private companies are required to structure their digital systems so that law enforcement can easily access their data on all their customers. So it's just a massive infringement on the whole concept of privacy which we've had for 100 years in our, in our memories of in our legislation, that we have an idea that we, part of being a sovereign, a country that has democracy is that privacy is inherent, right? And now they just ripped it all out with this bill. So I'm very, very concerned about C2.
I cannot say better than what you just said, Matthew, about that. You're absolutely right. I believe that, the big battle of this time is our own privacy. The federal government and provincial governments are doing everything to know everything about Canadians. That is the battle of today. And it's very sad that the Conservatives and the Liberals and the NDP and the Bloc Québécois, for them, it's not important. For us, it's a basic, People must be able to do what they want to do without any control from the government, without the government knowing everything about people. And now, you have a rule of law, and, the rule of law won't be respected because, like you said, if you want to have access to information, private information, usually you must go to a judge, and the police must go to a judge. They must have a good argument, and the judge will decide if they can have access or not to your phone calls, to your mail, and all that. But right now, with all these different bills, it is not important for the government. It is not important for the opposition. They don't need that anymore. It's easier for police and civil servants to have access to your own information without going to a judge for having an authorization.
Now we have Bill S-206 from the Senate. What is it and why is it concerning, Matthew?
Right. Well, S-206 is concerning because it's essentially rolling out UBI, Universal Basic Income, which I think they call Guaranteed Income Supplement or something like that. And this is central to the whole Great Reset agenda, and which the UN SDGs and all that all fit into this as well. And the idea is that if you can destroy the middle class's wealth by COVID, by the next pandemic, by the bank bail-in, which will be very much destroying the middle class as well. That means you have to, you're going to have people rioting in the streets, so you have to come up with, free money. So this gives free money to everybody, and they're talking about $2,000 a month. The problem is, when you've lost your job because they've crashed the dollar and all the tariffs are crashing all manufacturing in Ontario and Quebec, and then they're stopping all resource development, from new exploration and development of resources across Canada, particularly oil and gas in Alberta, you're taking this, what could be a country that was as wealthy as Saudi Arabia, you're purposefully, because they brainwash people with this whole idea that CO2, man-made CO2 is changing the climate and burning up the climate. It's just, by the way, the UN, IPCC that they say is their consensus of experts, these are all academics mostly that are, in a published or parish academic environment where they have to take money from governments and the UN, and even the oil companies are making as much money in sequestration of carbon projects than they are with oil. So they're taking this money to support that agenda. And it's no way that you can say there's ever a consensus in science, and certainly not with people that are being paid to essentially reiterate this nonsense agenda. And as a result, the damage that they're doing to the economy based on this is just, I just can't, imagine how we're going to get through this unless people actually say, that's enough. We don't want to lose our lifestyles and our freedoms and lose our houses and all this stuff.
Our regular guest, Martin Armstrong, has been predicting that Canada will split up east and west. How do you think this is going to work out? Do you think it's likely, Max?
It may, I hope it won't. That's why I said at the last election that the People's Party is the last hope for the future of this country, because if we don't respect the Constitution, if we don't have a radical decentralization, that will happen. And actually, that's why in Alberta they're not happy. So as you may know, Jim, in Alberta, maybe next year in 2026, they will have a referendum on the secession. And right now, there's about 30% of the population in Alberta that are saying enough is enough, and they want to separate. And, I just want to let you know, Jim, that when that referendum will happen, I can tell you that as the leader of the People's Party, I will be there. I will be there and tell them, vote yes. You may say, Maxime, why you want them to vote yes and separate if you want to fight for that federation and keep that country, united. It's because if they don't vote yes, they won't be able to have a new deal with Canada. The best example is in Quebec. We had a referendum on the secession in 1995, and me personally, I voted yes at that time, not because I was a separatist, but because I wanted the federal government to respect our constitution and to give more autonomy to provinces. And actually, the yes had 49% of the vote, and nothing happened after that. We had a lot of promises during that referendum campaign, but now, the federal government is more interfering in provincial jurisdiction than ever, and it's worse than ever. And so I'm telling, and that's why personally after that I decided to jump into federal politics in 2006 and try to change that. And that's why, with the Conservative, Harper was a good manager of a big fat government that was interfering in provincial jurisdictions. So I left that party, we created the People's Party, and our platform is in line with the Constitution. And if our platform is not adopted, I don't see a good future for this country. That being said, that's why I will be on the yes side in Alberta. I will tell them, if you vote yes, you'll have three options. The first one will be to be an independent country. The second one, to have a new deal with Canada. That's the only way the federal government will take you seriously if you vote yes, because we did vote yes with 49% in Quebec and nothing happened. So you need to vote yes to have a new deal with the federal government. And if you have a new deal with the federal government, it will be a new deal for every province. And that deal must be in line with the Constitution. And I believe that if the federal government respects the Constitution, you will be happy. And the third option is the 51st state. And I believe that during that campaign, I will be the only federalist leader that will say to Albertan vote yes. And they will have also the State Department and President Trump on their side for the 51st state. So it's sad, but we need to have a yes for the federal government to change and respect the Constitution, and that can happen in 2026. And maybe they won't have a new deal with Canada, and maybe they will separate. But also, don't forget, Jim, in Quebec, we have a young leader of the Separatist Party, the Parti Québécois, and he's very popular right now. He's winning in the polls because what? Because he's speaking about mass immigration a little bit like me. And in Quebec, like in English Canada, I believe they want to keep their culture. They want to protect their language, and so they don't like the fact that all these people are coming to Quebec. They don't speak English or French. They don't integrate into our society. So the PQ is very popular. And the leader of the PQ is saying to Quebecers, if you vote for the PQ, that means that you will have a referendum on the separation a year after the election. So the election in Quebec will be in 2026 at the provincial level. That means that maybe in 2027, we will have another referendum in Quebec on the secession. So maybe in 5 years, this country won't exist. And, I'm doing the fight for keeping that country united and prosperous. But if our platform is not adopted, if the federal government is not respecting the Constitution like it's doing right now, and if the federal government is not coming with a new deal with provinces, I don't know. Maybe your guess will be right, and that country won't exist in 5 years. We'll see. But my goal is to fight to keep that country, And that's why, I'm very disappointed of the Poilievre and the Conservative. They have a lot of support in Western Canada, and all these Western Canadians are voting Conservative, but Poilievre, is in line with a big fat government in Ottawa, and is taking the vote of Western Canadians for granted. And he said that, he will be on the no side. So that means he is for the status quo. So that will be very interesting. What will happen in Canada in the next couple of months?
Yeah, I must say I totally appreciate Maxime's analysis. I actually just learned a lot there. That makes total sense. That even if they're not for the idea of splitting with Canada, if you vote yes, at least you're in a negotiating position now for Canada to now come up with a reason why you should stay. Because it's an intolerable situation for Alberta, but also to some extent for Saskatchewan as well. And to have all these resources, and then the federal government's tying your hands and saying, no, you can't extract them because it's going to cause climate boiling. It's just nonsense, and it means that they're essentially giving massive transfer payments to the rest of Canada and not getting anything in return. In fact, they're suffering. So the thing is that I think that when they try and separate, I have no doubt that the referendum will be won. That there will be attempts by the Carney government to stop them, and including possible hauling out the military. That the law changed in Canada in the last couple of years. That the military is now allowed to actually focus on their own citizens, and that's where the U.S. is really critical on this, because the U.S. would easily, I could see, say that's enough of that. You're not going to go after those people and intervene, in which case that might push Alberta to go with the 51st state idea as opposed to an independent country. But I totally agree with Maxime's idea here, is that they should all be voting yes, just if nothing else than to break out of that, ball and chain that you can't develop your resources, which, it has great impact for the rest of Canada, and, because it's nonsense. It's just nonsense to have people struggling. We have like 2 million people at food banks now. We have, something like 50% of Canadians are like the $2,500 or $250 of being financially insolvent. The amount of suffering that's going on, and more people losing their jobs, and more people unable to feed their families, and yet we have all this wealth in the ground that, because of a totally, socialist and globalist ideology, they're leaving in the ground based on this big scare propaganda that 0.04% of the environment, of the atmosphere is going to, and we have like 1% of that is going to somehow change the climate. That's all nonsense. It's not supported by science, and it's just a ruse. It came up back in the 1960s from the Committee of 300 when they were asked how could the globalists get it so that people would give up their wealth and everything, and so this whole climate thing came up. So it's very sad, and I think that Alberta should go ahead with what they're doing, and I think that it'll be good, no matter how it turns out. However, if they do exit, it's going to be, curtains for, parts of Canada that are getting the transfer payments, which is, a lot of it's going to, places in the Atlantic Canada, for example. So it's going to be a real challenge, and I would see that if they do separate, I agree, Quebec is next, because, what they're getting now in transfer payments is quite large, and once that's gone, because Alberta's gone, it's going to mean, why not just be a separate country at that point?
Looking ahead, are you guys bullish or bearish on Canada and its economy? Max?
Jim, with everything that we said today, I think you will understand why I'm bearish on the future of our country and the economy.
I'm so glad to hear that very frank assessment. Usually people who are politicians will, sugarcoat and, say, oh no, it's great, So I really appreciate Maxime's honesty there. I mean, really, if you're informed of what's really going on and what's going on with our country right now, you have to be bearish, because, that also the tail's wagging the dog a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, with the fact that our economy is so dependent, our dollar particularly, so dependent on the U.S. dollar, and it's going down. So we're in for a real rough ride. As Maxime mentioned earlier, the next couple of years financially will be very difficult for people. But, I think that people should also get informed. There are things you can do, to try and make things better. And certainly getting engaged and networking in your community and participating in discussions like this, town halls and that kind of thing. There's up on X, for example, there's something called, Twitter Spaces. And with people, I'm a member of some of these spaces, we just get together and talk at a certain time, usually in the evening, and we discuss these very issues. Two Chicks in Politics, for example, is one. It's called Two Chicks Politics. And these are people from across Canada. There's a panel, and we discuss these issues. So anyway, I think that there's hope if people get engaged and say, it's time to put down the TV and actually get engaged here and find out what's going on. Thank you.
Matthew, where can our listeners follow you?
Sure. It's just on X is really the place where I'm present a lot of the time. It's Matthew Pauly. It's at MATTHEW, Pauly, Pauly 13 on X. Also, like the Stop C-293 committee, which also has a user handle up there. And we're doing a lot of advocacy and such. And I'd love to be in touch with people.
Maxime, where can our listeners follow you and donate to the People's Party of Canada?
Yes, they can follow me on Twitter, Maxime Bernier. They can also follow the People's Party on Twitter. They can go on our website, peoplespartyofcanada.ca. Our platform is there. Everything is there. And actually, we are the only national political party that is having a platform that is easy to read on our website. And as you know, Jim, we are doing politics differently because it's all based on ideas, not on polling and focus group. We think that we have the best vision for the future of this country. And if what we are saying today is not that popular, it's okay for us. We think that, the more you speak about your ideas, the more support you will have, and we won't change. So that platform on our website was the platform of our first electoral campaign in 2019, and 2021 and 2025 last couple of months ago. And that platform will be the same one for the next general election. So that's why we are doing politics differently. They can go and read that. And if they like what they're reading, they can donate because, we are receiving money from the Canadian citizens. And that's the only way that we can continue to promote our ideas. So thank you, Jim, for giving me that opportunity to be with you and answer your questions. And thank you also, Matthew. That was a great idea to have us together today.
Well, I just want to thank you very much, Maxime, and thank you, for allowing me to be here, Jim, because this is definitely a very important show, and I'm glad to be able to participate. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Maxime and Matthew, for being on This Week in Money.
Thank you.
Thank you.
My guests have been Maxime Bernier, leader of the People's Party of Canada, and Matthew Pauly, the co-founder and coordinator of the Stop C-293 committee. Coming up, Robert Campbell, next on This Week in Money.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com. This Week in Money is archived online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com.
Welcome back. My guest is Robert Campbell, publisher of the Campbell Real Estate Timing Letter. His website, realestatetiming.com. He's speaking to us from San Diego. Bob, welcome back to This Week in Money.
Hey, thank you very much, Jim. Glad to be here.
When's the next issue of the Timing Letter due, and where can people subscribe?
I just published it today. Oh. I published it online, in fact, just about 2 or 3 hours ago, and it can be found at realestatetiming.com.
Does your book, Timing the Real Estate Market, look at indicators of when real estate markets turn up and down?
Yep. It's like flying a plane on instruments, guys. It's like that it'll tell you exactly what you're doing. You don't have to think about it. You just look at the instruments and it'll tell you whether you're going up or down, right or left. And if you stay on the instruments, you'll get safely home or whatever destination you're going to.
We keep hearing gold is a relic, but maybe not. Why is gold so important now? I do remember about 12 years ago, people were just calling it a pretty rock.
They've been calling it a pretty rock, Jim, for 50 years. People that don't understand it, for one thing, and for one, people that own gold, for one thing, they don't trade it. They buy it and they hold it. And of course, Wall Street doesn't really want you to do that. And I'm talking about physical gold. But gold recently, it's in the last 10 years, physical gold has gone from $1,100 an ounce to $3,300 an ounce. That's a 200% rise. So the trend is definitely up. And I think today, with what governments are doing, central banks have been ditching the U.S. dollar as a reserve currency, and buying physical gold on a steady basis for the last 5 years. So what's happening is that gold is replacing the U.S. dollar as the reserve currency. And I think it's going to continue to do so because the United States just passed the big beautiful bill. And with increased government spending, of course, and decreased taxation. So what's going to happen? We're going deeper and deeper into debt. We're at $38 trillion right now. You'll probably in the next 12 months, I wouldn't be surprised to see it jump at least another $3 trillion. Because currently it's jumping up at $1 trillion every 3 to 4 months. It'll probably go up another $4 trillion. And then and there's. Because of the economics of all this government spending to keep the wheels on the car, there's no stopping that train. I think it's going to continue and continue. And some of the smart guys in the world are wising up and saying, we don't want the U.S. dollar anymore. We want gold. And it's performed really well. It's up 200% in 10 years. And it's hard to beat that. So I think it's a excellent long-term investment. Especially now that real estate's turning down, which is what we'll be talking about in a little bit.
Yes, what's the latest on real estate across the U.S.?
Across the U.S., this is real timely because I just finished writing the letter. Across the U.S., right now about 90% of all the metro areas in the United States are still rising in price, and only 10% are falling in price. So the trend is still definitely up for prices. However, when you look at momentum, if you look at what those cities have done in the last 12 months, and compare it what they from a year ago statistics in the same month, May 2024 versus May 2025, every one of those cities has a lower rate of growth in May 2025 than it did in May 2024. So the market is definitely losing momentum, and we are approaching the pinnacle, but we're not quite there yet.
What's the latest on California real estate?
California is, even though it's incredibly unaffordable, it's doing marginally better than the United States. And it's doing so not because of its price performance, but that it has a bigger cushion underneath it, because the supply of homes on the market that are available for sale is still, is still lower than the United States in general. And that's what's driving the car nowadays. Real estate price movement in any asset class driven by supply and demand. Real estate, gold, stocks, whatever. And in housing right now, and which has been the case in the last 5 years after COVID hit, they've had a dramatic drop in supply relative to even declining demand, and that's pushed prices up. Well, that the supply of homes, even though the demand has stalled for the last year, hasn't done anything, the supply of homes hitting the market is moving up significantly. And I think sometime by late 2025, the supply is going to overtake demand, and then you're going to see the start of the down cycle.
Do you think we'll see significant changes in supply and demand of homes by the end of the year?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, it's because you just look at current trends, and you know, I write this letter once every 2 months, so I'm looking at that, focusing on that very, very clearly. I mean, very, very intently right now, and that it has spiked up a lot. It's moving higher. And if the current trend continues, the supply of homes for sale will overtake the demand of homes for sale, and that means people are going to have to lower. Now you're in a buyer's market instead of a seller's market, and people are going to have to start lowering their price in order to sell, and the psychology of that starts the downtrend, especially at these super high prices where housing is unaffordable. That one statistic here in California, up in San Jose, California, you know, the average price home up there is something like $1.5 million. Has anybody been to San Jose? San Jose is not that great. $1.5 million. You have to be making $500,000 a year and have a down payment of $300,000 to buy an average single-family home in San Jose, California. That's how unaffordable California is. In San Diego, where I live, the median price home is over $1 million now. You have to be making like $300,000 a year and have $200,000 in the bank in order to buy the median price home. And that's why, on a historic basis, the number of first-time buyers has never been lower than it is right now, ever in history. That's because nobody can afford a house. I mean, in San Diego, who makes $300,000 a year and has $200,000 in the bank? What first time buyer? Nobody. So that's what's going to cause the crash.
Is the real estate sector of the stock market an early warning indicator of where home prices are headed?
No, it really isn't. That if you look at what happened during the last downturn, housing prices in the United States peaked in 2006. And then it wasn't until 2008 that the stock market got hit. So yeah, the real estate gave a 2-year quote unquote early warning. But I've never noticed any consistent relationship between the two.
Do you think low interest rates and a low U.S. dollar will be good for the U.S. economy and jobs?
No, I don't. Because what they're going to have to do, at this point, when you're at this point in the cycle, and the government, how are you going to? For one thing, I mean that's a really interesting question. And it's not an easy yes or no. Right now, the government is going to be the U.S. deficit is going to be approximately $2.5 to $3 trillion. That's inflationary, super inflationary. These tariffs are inflationary. And so what you're going to see is inflation isn't going away. That means there's no way interest rates are going down under current market conditions. No way. They're going to keep going up. And that's just because you keep deficit spending. You're putting $3 trillion of demand into the U.S. economy by the government, just choosing to do so, that you've got a checkbook where you can do that. That kind of demand's driving up prices, and it will continue to drive up prices until the government stops deficit spending. That you're not going to see any kind of real relief for interest rates or for inflation, and they can't stop it. At this point, that train's there's no stopping that train. If the U.S. government balanced the budget right now and took $3 trillion out of government spending, the U.S. economy would crash. That's $3 trillion worth of demand out of the economy. You couldn't take it. Look how many jobs would be lost. All of a sudden, there's $300 trillion less coming in. So whether it's consumer spending or the government spending, it doesn't make any difference. It's all about demand, and that's artificial demand. The government is spending money they don't have. They're putting it on the national debt. Interest rates are going up. Right now, I think finance or servicing the U.S. debt of $38 trillion. I think it's like $1.2 trillion. So keep adding to it, and interest rates go up. Pretty soon that's bigger than the defense budget. Pretty soon it's going to be $1.5 trillion. Pretty soon they're going to end up having to borrow money to pay interest on the national debt. I mean, that's the way this train is going right now. And the government's not going to stop it, because that they know that if they put an end to that, it'd be curtains for their careers as politicians, and that's all that matters to them.
Is the U.S. economy transitioning from bloated governments to growing the private sector?
No. The government's spending more and more money, as evidenced by the increased deficits.
AI, robots, and jobs. What happens when robots are doing more and more jobs and people are having fewer jobs?
That's a good question. And then as I tell people nowadays, I go to the gym. I lift weights every 2 to 3 days. So there's a lot of young kids in there, college kids, and I'm asking them. They're smart. A lot of them are going to college. I said, "What are you studying?" Blah blah blah. And my first question to them is, "Can you be replaced by a robot?" And they look at me and they go, "I hope not." But that's what you got to be thinking about nowadays, guys. That unless you're doing something creative where it takes analytical skills or creative thinking, or you're inventive thinking, or doing something like that, you can be replaced by a robot. For example, my background is real estate development. You're not going to get a robot or AI to build a building. Not going to do it. Every day you show up on the job site, there's something that needs to be tweaked. And unless you have experience, know who to call or what to do, that an AI robot would just stop dead in its tracks. So that's a good business to be in. If you're a plumber, can you be replaced by a robot? No. If you're a framer, no.
But house builder, yes, because they're using AI-guided robots to spray instant printed houses in a day.
Nobody's going to live in one of those. Jim, have you seen those 3D printed houses? They look like light industrial. And get a subdivision of those things.
Yeah, you still got to make them look nice.
Yeah, they can't. Because they're worked by a robot. There's nothing creative about it. They're square boxes. I've seen those things. They are so ugly that, maybe they'll build like they're one step up, probably from a mini house or something, or from a car. But that if you live in a nice area, are you going to live in a 3D printed home? Never in a million years. Because there's no creativity to it. They look ugly. And guys, I'll tell you something. What I've learned is that the world works on beauty. You got to make beauty. If you want to be successful, you got to if you're going to build something, build a beautiful thing. People want to live in beautiful houses. Men want beautiful wives. Wives want beautiful husbands. We all want beautiful cars. We all want beautiful watches. And is there anything beautiful about a 3D printed mortar house? Zero. So I would steer away from that. Unless that's your last choice to have a home to live in.
If Trump's tariffs are designed to create American jobs, could tariffs end up being good for the housing market?
Well, I'm not really... I don't know how to answer that question, because I don't know. To me, these tariffs are going to raise the price of things. And everybody goes, "Oh, no, they're not going to raise the price of things." And that comes from the government people, of course. A buddy of mine is a real successful... He's in the carpet business, and he manufactured it. And he's real successful. I mean, he's got a good business. He says his prices have gone up because of the tariffs incredibly. So he said, this stuff's going to price everybody. It's going to add to inflation. So that's my only real world input, guys. And I'm hearing stories, from other people that are more or less saying the same thing. The only people that aren't saying that are the Trump people in the Trump administration.
Food prices continue moving higher. Is price inflation really under control?
No, it's not. Not with deficit spending. It's not under control at all. So it's just going to keep moving. And not only, I mean, okay, price inflation, as reported by the U.S. government, moved up or something in the last report from 2.5 to 2.7. Is that a realistic number? No, not even close. At least double it. At least double it. Talk to some woman that shops at the supermarket every day. Who goes, how are food prices? I mean, and some things have come down, like eggs or maybe a few other things, but food inflation is still a big problem for the country. I mean, and maybe it's not food, maybe it's other items. Maybe it's cars. I don't know what Trump's putting these tariffs on. He changes his mind every other day. One day he's putting 30% tariffs on, and he goes, oh, the next day, just kidding, we're going to hold off and see what happens. Then, now he's going to put 100% tariffs on anybody that does business with Russia. And, I mean, that it's all kind of a joke, because if he did that, if he put 100% tariffs on all people that traded with Russia, that the world economy would collapse. The prices would double. I mean, because for one thing, people that do business with Russia, who are those people? Well, the BRICS countries. How many people in the BRICS countries? I don't know, quite a few, like 10, 15, 20. What percent of the world economy is traded under the BRICS right now? 42%. Oh, so you're going to put 100% tariffs on all those trades, right? Right. And that's not going to impact the world economy. It's going to collapse it. So I don't know what they're doing with these tariffs, to be honest with you.
Do most people have trouble standing up for themselves and what is right?
Yeah, they do. Yeah, they do, guys. And I've especially learned that lesson since COVID. Since COVID, everybody just seemed to, whatever the government said, whatever the government said to do, they're going to do it. They're going to do it. And I learned that lesson of standing up for yourself from my beagle. And let me tell you, beagles are the sweetest dogs in the world. But if a big dog comes up to them, and beagles are only 30 pounds, if a big dog comes up to them and starts messing with them, a beagle won't back down. And I learned that lesson from him. And the big dog will back away. So I'm just saying that when it comes to anything, stand. If you're right and somebody's just trying to bully you or just, that force you into doing something that you don't want to do, stand up for yourself. Stand up, just say, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. And I have to tell you guys a real life story about 2 years ago. I'm ex-military. I was an ex-Air Force pilot. I was getting my physical at the VA. And when I came in for my physical every year, they tell me the nurse comes in, takes my blood pressure, takes my temperature, and whatever else. And he said, Mr. Campbell, have you been vaccinated for COVID? And I said, it's none of your business. I said, Mr. Campbell, have you been vaccinated? I have to know. I said, it's none of your business. So she's typing away like crazy, that what I said and like this. So then the doctor comes in. He doesn't say a word about it. And I'm the healthiest patient that he has and probably will ever have. So we have a good time together talking about, how to maintain health. And 10 minutes after I was with him, when I was standing up to leave, he stood up with me and he said, Mr. Campbell, may I shake your hand? And I said, sure. And he looked at me and shook my hand. He said, I just want you to know what an honor it is to have someone like you as a patient of mine. And he said, I'm really happy. And the reason he did that was because I stood up for myself, and rightfully so. I wasn't trying to be confrontive or anything. It's none of their business. It isn't any of their business. And I stood up, and he agreed with me, the doctor, and he shook my hand. And I told a buddy of mine at the gym, I said, what happened? And he goes, that's great. And he said, that's so different than like social media. where they have, you know, I guess I'm not on social media, but you click a box and say how many people like you. And he said, would you rather be liked or would you rather be respected? And he looked at me and he said, respected. And I said, that doctor respected me. And he said, I know. So you got to stand up for yourself, guys. Just don't be bullied. Don't be bullied by pressure or something, by peer pressure, government pressure, job pressure, or anything. If you feel something strongly enough, you stand up for yourself, and people notice.
Anything on health for us?
Yeah, I'll tell you guys something on health. I always give you a tip. In fact, the last time we talked, one of the comments was, how come Robert Campbell didn't give us any health tips? Here's one for... I know, because we cut that out, remember? Because I messed up. Okay, here's a health tip for you guys. When you guys are out walking around, here's the way to walk to create maximum physical fitness. And the reason I say this, that it's my strong belief that the most important muscle group in your body are your glutes. Glutes being your butt muscles. Those are what keep your ass off the ground, guys, which is especially important when you get older, because you don't want to be falling, because that's typically curtains for you. So when you push forward, just don't move your legs. Push forward with your glutes. You know, tuck your, it's called a, it's called a tuck. You tuck you tighten your glute, your abs, and you push your butt forward. And when you walk, and you'll feel those muscles in your glutes. And that's the way you keep a tight ass, and that's the way you keep those muscles strong, and that's what keeps you, and that's what will keep you as strong as you can possibly be. Because I've always told you guys, your legs are your fountain of youth. And even if you're walking, that's the way to develop those muscles. I mean, I do it when I walk, I do it when I run, but I also do certain exercises at the gym. But even then, when you're walking forward, just push your butt forward, tighten your abs, and push yourself with your glutes. And you'd be surprised how strong you'll get. You'll feel it. Pretty soon your glutes will start hurting, and that's a very good thing. That's this month's tip, guys.
Where can people follow you, buy your book, Timing the Real Estate Market, and subscribe to your newsletter?
They can go to my website, realestatetiming.com.
Bob, thank you so much for being on This Week in Money.
Thank you for having me, Jim.
My guest has been Robert Campbell, publisher of the Campbell Real Estate Timing Letter, his website, realestatetiming.com. He was speaking to us from San Diego. And that wraps up our show for this week. We'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark, Maxime Bernier, Matthew Pauly, and Robert Campbell. And thank you for listening. If you have any questions for the show or for our guests, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. We'll be back next week with more This Week in Money.
Comments made on This Week in Money are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any manner whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com. This Week in Money is a production of Howe Street Media Incorporated. Executive producer is Tom Allen.